The galaxy stood at the precipice of turmoil during the Clone Wars, a conflict defined by the ideological schism between the Republic and the Confederacy of Independent Systems. At its heart, this struggle was orchestrated by Darth Sidious, a Sith Lord whose machinations had blurred the lines between friend and foe. Amid this chaos, the Death Star project, a massive superweapon capable of obliterating entire planets, was conceived in secrecy. But what if this weapon had been completed during the Clone Wars? Its premature arrival would have reshaped not only the conflict but also the trajectory of galactic history in profound and terrifying ways. The Death Star's completion during the Clone Wars would have provided the Sith with an unparalleled advantage, accelerating their path to dominance. Both the Republic and the Separatists were pawns in Sidious's grand scheme, and the unveiling of such a weapon would have rendered their military efforts insignificant. Its destructive capabilities, driven by a kyber crystal-powered superlaser, could have obliterated entire fleets and strongholds, leaving no room for conventional warfare. Neither the droid armies of the Separatists nor the clone troopers of the Republic would stand a chance against its overwhelming power. The Republic's reliance on Jedi leadership would also have faced a critical reckoning. The Jedi, once seen as peacekeepers and guardians of justice, were already stretched thin across the galaxy, commanding clone battalions on numerous battlefronts. The Death Star's existence would have posed an existential threat not just to the Republic but to the Jedi Order itself. Sidious, operating as Supreme Chancellor Palpatine, could have used the Death Star to eliminate key Jedi outposts and sanctuaries. Such an act would not only diminish the Jedi's physical presence, but also shatter their moral authority, as they would be powerless to prevent the widespread destruction. For the Separatists, the Death Star would have been an even more insurmountable obstacle. Although Count Dooku, the figurehead of the Confederacy, was a Sith apprentice under Sidious, he remained expendable in his master's grand design. The weapon's completion would have nullified the Separatists' military and political ambitions. Dooku might have realized his own vulnerability in this scenario, understanding that the Death Star's deployment marked the beginning of the end for his role in the Sith's plan. His armies of battle droids and warships, though formidable, would have been rendered obsolete against a weapon that could annihilate entire planets. Politically, the revelation of the Death Star would have fractured the galaxy in unprecedented ways. Fear would become the defining characteristic of the galaxy's governance. On Coruscant, Palpatine would likely use the Death Star as both a symbol of order and a tool of terror. Publicly, he could claim that its existence was necessary to maintain peace and prevent further fragmentation of the galaxy. This rhetoric, combined with the weapon's demonstration, would cow rebellious systems into submission. However, the underlying reality would be a galaxy shackled by oppression, with no hope of resistance. The Death Star's existence would also have accelerated the transition of the Republic into the Galactic Empire. In the original timeline, the Republic's transformation was a gradual process, manipulated through propaganda, legislation, and the marginalization of dissenting voices. With the Death Star, this transformation could occur instantaneously. Sidious could have declared an end to the Clone Wars by unilaterally imposing his authority, using the superweapon as a means to enforce compliance. The Senate, already weakened and subservient, would have been rendered irrelevant. Even systems loyal to the Republic might have balked at the sheer scale of power concentrated in one weapon, but their protests would be stifled through fear or annihilation. The psychological impact of the Death Star's completion cannot be overstated. Fear of total destruction would overshadow every other concern. On Coruscant and other core worlds, citizens might initially celebrate the weapon as a means of securing peace. However, as the galaxy realized the true extent of the weapon's capabilities, paranoia and unrest would set in. No planet would feel truly safe, knowing that the Death Star could be turned against them at the slightest hint of disobedience. This pervasive fear would lead to a breakdown of trust between systems, as the galaxy devolved into a state of mutual suspicion. The Jedi, ever attuned to the Force, would have perceived the Death Star as a monumental disturbance. The kyber crystals used to power the superweapon were sacred to the Jedi, embodying life and the Force itself. The weaponization of these crystals would have represented a profound corruption of the natural order, further heightening the Jedi's sense of urgency. However, their ability to act would be severely limited. The Death Star's overwhelming power would render traditional Jedi tactics ineffective, and their numbers were already dwindling due to the attrition of the Clone Wars. The Jedi would face an agonizing dilemma how to counter an unstoppable force while adhering to their principles of nonviolence and justice. Rebellions, if they arose during the Clone Wars, would have been swiftly crushed by the Death Star. Figures like Mon Mothma, Bail Organa, and Saw Gerrera, who would later play pivotal roles in resisting the Empire, might not have had the opportunity to organize dissent. Entire planets suspected of harboring rebels could be obliterated, silencing opposition before it could gain momentum. The mere threat of the Death Star would discourage even the most determined insurgents, creating an atmosphere of despair and hopelessness. On the battlefield, the Death Star's deployment would have fundamentally altered military strategy. Large-scale engagements between fleets would become irrelevant in the face of a weapon capable of annihilating them in seconds. The commanders on both sides would have to adapt to the new reality, prioritizing guerrilla tactics and subterfuge over direct confrontations. However, such efforts would be hampered by the omnipresent threat of planetary destruction. Entire sectors might be abandoned as military leaders realize the futility of resistance. One of the most profound consequences of the Death Star's early completion would be its impact on the Sith themselves. Sidious's grand vision was predicated on absolute control, but the Death Star's existence might have accelerated internal tensions within the Sith hierarchy. Dooku, already aware of his expendability, might have sought to challenge his master in a desperate bid for survival. Such a confrontation would likely be brief, as the Death Star's power ensured Sidious's dominance. However, it could also expose vulnerabilities in the Sith's plans, as infighting and hubris might lead to unforeseen consequences. Furthermore, the Death Star's presence would have drawn the attention of the galaxy's fringe elements. Organizations like the Hutt Cartel, Black Sun, and other criminal syndicates might have seen the superweapon as a direct threat to their autonomy. These groups, while not ideologically aligned with the Republic or the Separatists, might have sought to undermine the Death Star's operations through sabotage or subterfuge. However, their efforts would be fraught with danger, as failure would invite catastrophic retaliation. Amid this backdrop of fear and oppression, the question arises, could hope survive in such a galaxy? The completion of the Death Star during the Clone Wars would have seemingly extinguished the spark of resistance before it could ignite. Yet the very nature of the Force suggests that balance would eventually assert itself. Individuals like Anakin Skywalker, whose destiny was intertwined with the fate of the galaxy, might have played a pivotal role in challenging the Death Star's dominance. However, Anakin's own arc, shaped by his fall to the dark side and subsequent redemption, would have been profoundly altered by the weapon's existence. In this alternate timeline, the galaxy's future would hinge on the resilience of its inhabitants. The Death Star's power, while immense, would not be absolute. History has shown that even the most oppressive regimes are vulnerable to the collective will of those who resist. If the galaxy could unite in defiance of the Death Star, its reign of terror might eventually be overturned. However, such unity would be exceedingly difficult to achieve in a galaxy fractured by fear and mistrust. The completion of the Death Star during the Clone Wars represents a chilling what-if scenario, one that underscores the precarious balance between power and morality. Its existence would have brought the galaxy to the brink of annihilation, forcing every individual and institution to confront the true nature of tyranny. In the end, the galaxy's fate would rest not on the strength of its armies, but on the courage of those willing to stand against unimaginable odds. While the completion of the Death Star during the Clone Wars would have undoubtedly tilted the balance of power in favor of the Sith, its overwhelming presence would also have created a glaring weakness. It would have become the ultimate symbol of tyranny, drawing the unified ire of the galaxy. For the Jedi, the Death Star's sheer size, prominence, and reliance on kyber crystals, a resource deeply tied to the Force, would have made it a primary target. The Jedi, though diminished in number, were resourceful and driven by their connection to the Force, which had historically enabled them to overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. The Death Star's existence would not have gone unnoticed by the Jedi's heightened awareness. They would have sensed the disturbance it caused, both in its construction and operation, amplifying their resolve to bring it down. It is likely that surviving Jedi, allied with sympathetic factions within the Republic and even disillusioned separatists, would have united to launch a desperate assault. With their mastery of strategy, covert operations, and the Force, the Jedi would have pursued every avenue to exploit the weapon's vulnerabilities. Ultimately, the Death Star's overwhelming might and the fear it wielded would have painted it as an unmistakable target. Its destruction would have become not just a military objective, but a moral imperative for anyone who valued freedom and justice. In attempting to centralize absolute power, Sidious would have inadvertently created the focal point for resistance, a unifying target that could galvanize even the most fragmented opposition. While its completion during the Clone Wars would have marked a dark chapter in galactic history, it would also have ignited the determination of the Jedi and others to fight back, proving that no weapon, no matter how powerful, is truly invincible.